So I'm here with my colleague Brian Schellenberg. He does research in the German-speaking parts of the world. A lot of people, Brian, think of Germanic research as Germany. Really quickly, do you want to give like some ideas in terms of the scope of geographic scope of the research you do?
Yeah, that's a really big question, and it's always hard to write my description in my bios and things like that because yeah, German speaking Europe, today officially Germany, Austria, parts of Switzerland, Luxembourg. There's large pockets of German speakers in France. People might have heard the term Alsace-Lorraine. It's kind of a catch-all for German speaking areas, but Germans have gone all types of places as colonists within Europe and outside of Europe. There are are and were German-speaking villages in Ukraine, in Russia, what's now Hungary, Romania, Brazil, Argentina, obviously the United States, big pockets in the Midwest. Texas has a large German community. So yeah, sort of almost all over the world. German colonies in China, Qingdao beer started out
Ah,
from a German colony. So yeah, Germans are everywhere for
yeah.
better or worse.
Yeah, and so how does that play out in terms of research within these communities? Do you find that records in these communities outside of Germany, Austria, the typical places where we know German is spoken nationally, do you find that in these other places, like on the Volga in Russia, the Black Sea, Texas, and elsewhere, that the records for those communities tend to also be in German or no?
Yeah, for the most part, historically at least, Germans tended to bring their own record-keeping traditions, and this is mainly speaking as far as religious records. A lot of them were Lutherans, Reformed, also known as Calvinist, or Roman Catholics, and so most times they would settle in their new area, but would maintain their religious records in German, maybe Latin for Roman Catholic populations, but usually German. So you'll see every once in a while, Pennsylvania is a great example, the Pennsylvanian Germans, where you go to a parish, an old parish in Pennsylvania, and you see it looks exactly the same as a parish record in Germany, written in the same script, using the same headings and columns because they just brought that tradition with them.
hmm And so that's an interesting comment you made about the religion. So for Catholics who are German speaking, the records were in Latin. You were saying, does that mean that for Protestants, the records were written in the vernacular of the people, German?
Yeah, generally, yeah, Protestant records are going to be in the vernacular much earlier than Catholic records. Catholic records will be in Latin later, and it really depends. Parish by parish, diocese by diocese, um, pastor by pastor, whatever the person felt like writing in. But yeah, usually the Protestant records will be in the vernacular, and then Catholic will stick to Latin much later.
And so, in the records written in Latin, are the names Latinized, or are they retained in the Germanic form?
Yeah, given names will certainly be Latinized. Surnames will usually be left as they are, except for grammatical case changes and things like that. There are some periods, especially like around the Enlightenment and things like that, where it was popular to Latinize a surname. So Weber would become Sartorius or something like that. But
Ah,
usually
very
usually
different.
usually in the original record. Yeah, the given names will be in Latin, surnames in German, and that can be a real challenge. Some of them are pretty clear, like Heinrich becoming Henricus, but Franz becoming Franciscus might be a little bit less straightforward. And then fantastic example, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was not baptized as Wolfgang Amadeus. He was actually Wolfgang Theophilus.
Ah,
which isn't a German thing. It's a Theophilus is a Latinized Greek name, but then he tended to prefer to go by Amadeus in later records. So
oh yeah, that's
really interesting
interesting.
stuff.
Yeah, yeah, an important resolution there for folks who are like starting out in researching, to keep in mind that there may be a Latin form of the name as well as the German form, because you may miss some important records there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, w- to what extent was Prague in the Czech Republic, which fell under the Holy Roman Empire at various points in the Habsburgs, German speaking, and when?
Yeah, it was definitely it has been primarily Czech speaking for much of its history, since the Great Migrations. But then starting in the Middle Ages, the kings of Bohemia was as it was called at the time. The Czech lands were Bohemia, but they were originally a native Czech dynasty, and then it was inherited by the Habsburgs, which were a German-speaking dynasty based
From
in
Austria.
Vienna, Austria, right?
Mm.
And so as they sort of started centralizing their domain, they really started to encourage German language, and so in Prague specifically, and Prague even was the capital of the Habsburg domains at one specific period under Rudolf II, but German just kind of started to become the language of status. From my understanding and what I've seen in records, the majority of the population of Prague still, spoke Czech as their first language. But if you wanted to get anywhere in politics, business, military, you would have to speak German. And so you will see some earlier records in Czech. Then starting in 1771, specifically, Maria Theresia, the empress at the time, um, declared that all records had to either be in German or in Latin. This is empire wide, or at least within the Habsburg hereditary lands. And so, from 1771 up until the revolutions in 1848, even if your family, spoke Czech at home, if they had Czech given names, Czech surnames, you'll find records of them written in German or potentially in Latin, depending on the parish or the district. And so that's where the name changes really should be kept in mind.
But not in Czech.
Right. Yeah, not in Czech. Yeah. So and then so before 1771, you'll sometimes see Czech, mostly Latin, at least in Catholic areas, and then post 1848, that's when you'll start seeing parish registers in Czech again. And to the point about name changes, my favorite name, number one because it's interesting, number two because it's my name. My middle name is Bela, after my father, who was born in Hungary. But you will not find a Bela in a Latin record or a German record. In a Latin record, a Bela will appear as Adalbertus, and
Uh,
in a German record as Albrecht. And I bring this up in the Czech sense as well because it's the same for the name Wojtek.
oh
Wojtek.
yeah.
These names don't have an etymological connection, but you will see a Wojtek in German records as Albrecht or Adalbert, and in Latin as Albertus or Adalbertus, because there was a Saint Adalbert of Prague was originally named Wojtek, but when he was being canonized, they thought that's not a proper Christian name,
To
so
Albert.
they baptized him as Albert because his mentor was Albert of Magdeburg. And then there
Uh,
was a king named Bela of Hungary, and kind of same reason. Bela is not a good Christian name. We need to give you a Christian name. And Adalbert of Prague by that time was a saint, and so he took that as his saint's name. And so
got it.
it's sometimes it's etymologically related, sometimes it's just culturally, like in the names of Wojtek, Adalbert, and Bela, where they're not etymologically related at all, but they're considered the same name between cultures just based on those connections.
Yeah, and quick side note, the past the past uh, Pope was born Wojtek,
Oh yeah.
um, as well. So not the current one. That was Ratzinger. No, John Ratzinger, I think it was, right?
Mhm.
Who was born Wojtek? Yeah, or was it John Paul, the Polish one?
I think he was, see, Carl? I think his last name was maybe Voitola or something like that. I don't know.
Let-
We'll have to look that up.
We'll report back on that one. Yeah, so that's cool. So in Prague, which fell under the Habsburgs and Germanizing record keeping and things like that. Sometimes the records are in German, um, sometimes they're in Latin, depending on the religion. Um, at that time, there was no civil registration, though, right? So if people are conducting research on family, they're going to primarily be looking at the religious records. Or both Catholic and non-Catholic records readily available in the Czech Republic or Prague during that period, or no?
Yeah,
1700s.
yeah, for the most part, they're generally. I mean, it's the caveat of any place where there might have been a flood or a fire in one parish or another, but for the
Sure.
most part, yeah, parish records for the Czech Republic are generally in very good condition. The main problem is they're not organized centrally. There's no one central archive for the Czech Republic, and they're not. There's no universal index. I know there are some groups that are working on individual indexes, kind of going parish by parish. Currently, they are organized. They're scanned. At least surviving records that they know about are scanned. They're available online, but they are uploaded to their own regional Czech
Archives.
archives. Yeah, so you need to figure out, that's sort of the challenge is number one, figuring out where your ancestor came from. Number two, what religious parish covered that place. And then number three, what current archive uh, includes the records for that parish. And then once you figured that out, learning to read Latin or Czech or German is the next big challenge.
Yeah. Speaking of challenges with this type of research, if some random person came up to you and said, "Can you tell me what are the two biggest challenges for doing genealogical research or historical research in all these German speaking communities?" What are two that you would point out?
Yeah, number one is just finding the place. It seems like maybe one of the most
Jurisdiction.
simple. Yeah, the jurisdiction. A lot of times, immigrants to new countries tend to want to not necessarily forget the past, but they just don't really talk about the old country as much. And
Hmm.
kind of because the records are organized at such a local level, we're really spoiled in the United States with just our general searchable databases, and then our census every 10 years, where you can just type in a name and find where that person was. To your point, civil records weren't required in the Austro-Hungarian Empire ever, even up until it dissolved in 1918. Hungary did start in the 1890s, the Hungarian half of the empire, but the Austrian half that included what's now the Czech Republic, they didn't start keeping civil records until after independence.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so just figuring out where your ancestor came from is a big challenge. And then number two is it's the language. There are really easy pitfalls to fall into that you never will realize you fell into, just because handwriting was different. Not even that handwriting was difficult to decipher. Like if we're trying to read a letter from our grandparents or whatever, and we can't read their cursive. Old German handwriting was just a completely different handwriting style. Um,
Hmm.
Czech and Latin were usually written in sort of a cursive we would recognize, but just the vocabulary, the grammatical forms can change completely the way a name is spelled, a word is spelled. A good example, we're talking about Czech, so a very good example. The possessive of masculine names in Czech, for the most part, it depends on how the name ends, but it usually involves adding an A. And so if your ancestor's name is Jan, the common Czech form
Yeah,
of
no.
John, the possessive, son of John will be Jana, Jana. And I
Mm,
see all the time clients or other researchers say, oh, this person only, their mother's name was Yana. They didn't have a father, their father wasn't named in the record. And I look in the record and say, no, Yana is of John. The
yeah.
father's name is John. If you keep reading, then there is, Katarini, which is the possessive form of Katarina. So
Hmm.
that those are big pitfalls that both places with border changes, you can identify the completely wrong place because of name changes, and then once you get in there, you can just identify the wrong people just because you're not really understanding the names and the words as they're written in their language.
Yeah, speaking of place names, what are some like a couple of major resources that folks can use to identify the place name? Once you know a place, let's say from a record in Brazil or the United States or Canada, once you know the name of the place, what's the next step to like finding the jurisdiction in Europe?
Yeah, they're really good. Kind of the big thing for genealogists are what are called gazetteers, and these
Mm.
are basically historical lists of place names as they existed in different times. And these can be very helpful on their own, but nowadays with advances in the internet and things like that, a lot of people have put together using these old gazetteers, comparing them to modern gazetteers, encyclopedias, Wikipedia, and things like that, and just kind of creating one-stop databases. The big one for Germany, it's based on the Myers Gazetteer from the 1890s, and they've created a really nice website. You just type in Myers Gaz, it'll pop up, and they have the name as it appeared in the 1890s. They have the name as it appears today. They've
Historic
stitched,
changes.
yeah, they've stitched an old survey map of the German Empire over modern Google Maps, and you can toggle back and forth.
Mm,
Um, there's a similar Austria-Hungary doesn't have the same sort of one-stop shop as it were, but there are some really good uh, um, websites that are really helpful. There's a website called genteam.at. The .at is the domain for Austria, so
Austria.
made by an Austrian researcher, but it has a really nice gazetteer where you can type in the name, either the modern name or the historical name, and it'll pop up a list of places that match those criteria. Um, that's especially both in Austria-Hungary and in Germany. Place names can be very literal. I think
Hmm.
in English-speaking areas and even France to a certain extent, there's a lot more, names based on that kind of morph from old Roman or Celtic or whatever names, and that happens in Austria-Hungary and Germany too. But there tend to be a lot more, Neudorf, new town, and
Hmm.
Altenburg, old castle. And so there might be 25 places that have that same name. And so those gazetteers are really helpful for identifying the correct place.
Got it. And how useful is DNA testing when trying to make progress on genealogy in German-speaking parts of the world?
It can be hit or miss. It's something that, I you shouldn't ignore. If you're really interested in doing your genealogy anywhere, take an ancestry test, take a family tree DNA test, just kind of spread the matches as far as you can. It tends to be much less helpful for continental Europe just based on um,
They're not
privacy laws
testing.
to a certain extent, but
Yeah.
also just the stigma, especially in Germany and Eastern Europe. of ethnic tensions. And so, testing someone's DNA to figure out their ethnicity is just not something that's popular. So
Hmm.
you'll very rarely find good matches in Europe, but you never know who else also immigrated to the United States. Where I've had most of my success is by finding, this was your immigrant. They also had a sibling who immigrated, and that sibling, for whatever reason, just passed on better information. They passed on their passport or they had the family Bible, and that stayed in the family. So the family in that ended up in Missouri didn't keep this information, but the family that ended up in Wisconsin, for whatever reason, did. And the only way we figured that out was through DNA.
Hmm.
Or, a more recent immigrant that I had a breakthrough once in a Polish research project where the ancestor had come over in the 1800s and we weren't getting any DNA matches. But then one popped up where this DNA test taker had been born in Poland, but then immigrated to the United States in the early 2000s and came from the same village, it turned out,
Oh,
where the ancestor in the 1800s had come from. And so, if she had stayed in Poland, she never would have taken the test. But she moved to the United States, and probably one of her friends was like, "Oh, hey, ancestry DNA is fun to do," and
yeah.
took the test, and it 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 did the work that maybe would have taken us 20 or 30 hours digging through old US records in the 1800s trying to find that place name. We just had this great DNA match who came from the place.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because a lot of folks would probably say, "Oh, not many people are going to take the test in Europe, so what's the point, anyways?" People have large families. One
Hmm.
sibling may, immigrate to Missouri or to Louisiana. Another may have gone to Australia, where they left, better information about the specific, town or village or whatever that they came from. So DNA testing is always useful, even if it's later on that the match pops in there and gives you the
Hmm.
information. Yeah, really cool. Um, to what extent is citizenship possible in some of these German or former German speaking parts of Europe for folks who are, let's say, in the US or Canada?
Yeah, it really, understandably, it varies by the modern country.
Hmm.
Each sort of has its own laws, and those laws are changing from almost from day to day. Germany can be very difficult. Sort of the most standard route. One of your parents has to have been a German citizen at the time of your birth. There is a more recent law where if one of your ancestors was the victim of Nazi persecution, you can qualify for German citizenship.
Ah,
But they're pretty strict in their definitions there. So that can certainly be a challenge. Sort of what you're terming as Germany versus, just because of border changes before World War II, after World War II, it can really depend. Um, Austria is basically similar, where one of your parents has to have been an Austrian citizen. Hungary does have basically two paths to ancestral citizenship. Um, the one might seem to be the easiest, but it's not really. Basically, they'll accept anybody whose ancestor lived in Hungary just about at any time. But in order to qualify, you have to pass a proficiency test in the Hungarian
not,
language. And
not an easy
I,
language.
right, I can sense people thinking, "Oh, that's easy. I'll just take a Hungarian." Hungarian is not only is it, not in the same, not it's not a Germanic language, not a Romance language, not a Slavic language. It's not even an Indo-European language.
Yeah,
It's more,
unrelated.
yeah, unrelated. It's related to languages of tribes in Siberia, as well as
Hmm.
oddly Finland and Estonia. But very difficult language. But if you were born, or if your ancestor was born in Hungary after a certain date, then it's much more straightforward. Romania has also a pathway back to great grandparent if your great grandparent was a citizen of Romania. So a little bit more strict than Hungary, that you have to prove that they were a citizen of the state of Romania. So living
Mm.
within, not just within the borders of modern Romania, but within Romania at the time that your ancestor was a resident. So, there you can look into these possibilities, and we're happy to do the research for you and sort of clarify. But it can be very, very complicated. And like I said, each country has their own laws.
Yeah. Which of all the different places where German speakers ended up historically, which are the ones that you actually enjoy doing and also strongly dislike?
Oh man, each one is its own unique challenge. I'll just say, just I love Austria. I studied there. Like I said, my dad was born in Hungary, but to a German and Hungarian speaking family. They lived in a town or a city called Sopron, which is about an hour maybe east of Vienna. So I love Austrian research. I love Germans in Hungary. Um, the sort of the German colonists in Eastern Europe can be really fun, um, because they were such sort of tight-knit groups. They have really good resources for compiled records, full town genealogies often, that can be really helpful. And then just kind of navigating the cultures and things like that can be really fun. Um, the Probably the most frustrating place to do research is Pomerania, which is a bit of a bummer because that's where one of my mom's lines comes from. But basically, after World War II, the German Lutheran population was expelled, and so and then Polish, mainly Roman Catholics, moved in, and so the a lot of the old Lutheran records were lost, were destroyed, and so finding records there can be a real pain. But there's no place I think that I see where I think, oh man, I really wish I didn't have to.
Except Pennsylvania.
Always fun. Yeah. Well, and Pennsylvania, it's one of those. It's always. I should say, so much of the frustration isn't because of the research. It's just, I want to be as good of a steward for my clients as possible, but because they're trusting us probably with two of the most important things, their family and their money, and I want to make sure I'm
Yeah,
doing my best. So I think
yeah,
you can probably relate to this too, where as a researcher, it
yeah.
can be really fun to have a really challenging project where, in the moment you're pulling your hair out, but you're figuring things out, you're learning new things, you're making these connections. But communicating that to a client, who's paying you money, that's mainly where the frustration is. And obviously I completely understand they're having to have faith in us to do the best that we can.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good conversation. So if you guys have research in the German speaking parts of the world, whether it's Pennsylvania or the Midwest, someplace, even Louisiana, we haven't spoken too much about Louisiana's connection to the German speaking world, but we have a whole set of parishes in South Louisiana that formed during the colonial period as the German coast, and in the 1720s, early 1720s, John Law brought over, German speakers that he recruited to go and settle in Louisiana. That then got so. There are a lot of Creoles and Cajuns in Louisiana with German last names or Germanic last names.
Mm.
Some of them got creolized, and you have no idea. And a lot of those folks are, interested in genealogy too. So if you guys are on the hunt for a specialist of genealogy in the German speaking world, Brian, who's on my team, is a good person to work with. So DM me, let me know, and we can get you set up. Brian, thanks for the chat. It's been good.
Thank you. This was fun. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Take care.
Bye-bye.